Hi guys, here we are. How's everybody feel? Buzzing a little bit, yeah? Lots of momentum. I feel like my brain is whirring all over the place after Chad's session just now. That was incredible. And I have a feeling this is why Pep wanted me to go last, because I really want to talk to you guys today about how to build and maintain momentum internally around experimentation. Or in other words, how to get your entire organization psyched. And I'm talking psyched about experimentation. So a little bit about me, if we haven't connected yet. I am the marketing lead at Wider Funnel. I've been with the company for about 3.5 years. If you're not familiar with Wider Funnel, we're an experimentation enablement company, which means we work with brands to help them implement, run, and scale experimentation programs. And when I say experimentation in this talk, I'm talking about the controlled experiments a business is running to uncover insights, drive growth, and guide decision-making. And given Chad's talk just now, I do want to clarify that the stories that I'm going to share today really revolve around marketing experiments or optimization, just so that we're all on the same page. So why are we all here at this conference? I think it's because we all really want to achieve experimentation at scale. And why do we want to do that? These are some pretty big numbers from some organizations that we all know very well. And we want to achieve experimentation at scale because we're seeing that the organizations that are doing this are winning in the market. So over the past 12 years of doing this work at Wider Funnel, we've identified 5 levels of experimentation maturity, from just getting started to being a driving force, having experimentation drive your company. And for us, there are 5 components of experimentation maturity. Now, there are lots of good experimentation maturity models out there, but these components should feel somewhat familiar. For us, they are process, accountability, culture, expertise, and technology. But in this talk, I really want to focus on fostering a culture of experimentation, because it's essential. And we've seen quite a few talks this week that are focused on this, and we're also seeing it all over the place. I think I'm not the only one who is talking about this in conversation with people who do this work. We're all trying to figure out how to build a culture of experimentation at our organizations. The publications we all read are writing about it. Brands we talk to are writing about how they're doing it. People are trying to answer this question and figure out how to solve this particular pain point. And I would argue that ultimately, a culture of experimentation is a factor of effective communication. And if you can't get this part right, your program will never be as successful as it could be. You could be putting in effort, generating good results, but if you can't communicate it, if you can't shine a light on what you're doing, you will hit a ceiling. So I want to paint a bit of a picture for you. So imagine we have an organization. And within that organization, there is an experimentation champion, or maybe, as Tan would say, an experimentation enabler. And she's a one-woman show. She believes in experimentation. She sees the value. She knows that this is what her organization needs. This is the key. And she wants to get everyone as excited, as bought in to experimentation as she is. So she decides to get everyone involved, which, sounds good in theory. So she starts sourcing ideas from everyone and everywhere in her organization. But there's a problem, because not everyone understands experimentation in the same way. Not everyone is thinking about it in the same way. Not everyone is even thinking about their ideas before they submit them at all. So she's getting tons and tons of ideas, and eventually, because she's a one-woman show, she gets snowed under. And over time, the experimentation program becomes a joke. It becomes a dumping ground where ideas go to die and nothing seems to be getting done at all. And of course, the teams around her start to lose faith in the program. They stop submitting ideas. They stop really even thinking about experimentation as a way to answer real questions. And eventually, experimentation becomes that thing we tried once, it doesn't work for us, so we put it away. This is a story we actually see unfold really often. So how do we do better? How do we foster a culture of experimentation and avoid this type of crash and burn scenario? With 3 simple actions. And I say simple, they're simple hopefully conceptually, less simple in practice, but I'm talking about, did I skip a slide? Well, there we go. These 3 actions. I'm talking about inspire, educate, and inform. And when I say inspire, I'm talking about the spark. This is the moment where you're creating awareness around new possibilities, as well as a desire to take action. So it's not just being inspired, it's actually being motivated to get involved, to act. Educate is training. This is formal or informal, but I'm talking about instruction or supervised practice to help someone learn a skill. In this case, how to do experimentation. And inform is closing the loop. This is actually communicating knowledge, communicating a message. Now, these 3 actions are presented linearly here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that inspire comes before educate, which comes before inform. In most cases, these are happening simultaneously. They overlap. So in our journey to a culture of experimentation, these 3 actions need to be present at each stage in your organization's journey. So when a company is just getting started, it's likely a core team that owns the experimentation program. But eventually, you're going to want to scale up to get your supporting teams involved. But before you do that, you need to make sure that inspire, educate, and inform are happening within that core team. Then the core team is able to take that action, scale it to enable those supporting teams, with the ultimate goal being that your broader organization has an experimentation mindset, that mindset permeates the culture, from CEO to lead engineer to the customer service reps who are answering the phone. So I want to give you some stories to help tangibilize this a little bit. So we're going to look at 2 organizations. The first one is really just getting started with experimentation. So like I said, at this stage, it's likely that a core team owns the program. And because experimentation is a new strategy for this organization, a brand new strategy, they're really focused on getting executive level buy-in to make sure the program stays alive, and building a momentum around initial experiment wins. We've talked a lot about valuing our learnings from experiments that don't necessarily win, but in this case, it's really important to get a little bit of a buzz around the ones that do win. So this is one of our partners, Envoy. Envoy is a technology startup based in the Silicon Valley, and they sell a platform that they call a visitor management solution. So basically, their software provides a solution that allows companies to provide a seamless experience when welcoming visitors to their office. So if you go to someone's office and you check in via iPad, and the person you're coming to see gets notified, you get a little badge printed off, that's likely Envoy or one of their competitors. This is Michelle. Michelle is the head of demand generation at Envoy. 6 months ago, she decided to implement an experimentation program at the company. But as an experimentation champion, she knew she needed to start by recruiting her core experimentation team. And because she's a very, very smart woman, she started with recruiting an executive sponsor. This is Russ, VP of Revenue and Success at Envoy. Now, Russ has an all-star sales background, but was very unfamiliar with experimentation, conversion rate optimization in general. So this is where Michelle really began her efforts around inspire, educate, and inform. But she had to be delicate. The company had just gone through a pretty big redesign, and the entire team was really bought into the redesign. So Michelle knew that she had to articulate her intentions for experimentation quite clearly. And so she explained to Russ that while the redesign had been really successful from a brand and an aesthetic point of view, based on her experience, there were still potential areas of friction, potential barriers to conversion in the user experience. And she pointed out that the company was spending a lot of money on paid and on SEM to funnel traffic to the website, and asked him what opportunities they would be missing by not working to convert more of that traffic. And she also pointed out the new possibilities around what they could do if they were able to increase signups, which was their primary conversion metric, by 2%, 5%, 10%. What could they do with that increase? So with this story, Michelle was able to inspire Russ enough to get the green light for her strategy. But her core team wasn't quite complete. So just curious from your points of view, who else do you think Michelle would need on the core experimentation team? Any ideas? Come on, guys. Yeah, an engineer. That's perfect. That's who she went to next. So she recruited Alex, Envoy's senior software engineer, to join the core team. And she also recruited one of their lead designers, Amy, because she wanted to, from the outset, make this a collaborative effort with a focus on iterating on the entire customer experience, not really just a performance marketing play. Now, there were still a few gaps in what Envoy could do internally, so they brought in an enabling partner as well, in this case, Wider Funnel. And this became Envoy's core experimentation team. And within this team, Michelle was working to inspire, educate, and inform the key members of this core team. So, for example, apologies for that slide. Alex had some questions, some concerns about experimentation, how it would work, how it could disrupt his workflow. So Michelle paired him with Wider Funnel's lead engineer over multiple conversations, where Wider Funnel could provide a crash course on what the process would look like and how experimentation would support rather than disrupt the work that Alex was already doing. And Michelle said that after these conversations, Alex turned to her and smiled, which she said was kind of a rare occasion, and told her that he was excited to get started and that this was clearly something that Envoy had been needing to do for a long time. That's inspiration. Now, Envoy had decided that the site-wide navigation was the place that they wanted to start their first experiment. It was a high-impact place on the website, but it's also a highly visible place. So Michelle wanted to make sure to bring Amy into these initial conversations right off the bat to make sure that any variations that were being designed were aligned with her vision for the website visually, and also just to have her in the room as part of the conversation as the experiments were being ideated and developed. So like I said, they focused on the site-wide navigation for the first experiment. And there were lots of discussions around this experiment because there are some really valuable links in this site-wide nav, particularly in the products and the Why Envoy dropdown. So there are lots of conversations about pulling certain pages out, putting them in the nav. But we decided to refocus and go really simple and focus on this keyword. So Envoy was really pushing this keyword in paid and in SEO, visitor management solutions. And it was based on user research that they had that showed that their customers really thought of their platform as a solution. That's how they described it, that's how they talked about it. And we know by listening to Joanna and else that voice of customer is super important. So the variation was extremely simple. Changing Why Envoy, which housed some really important value proposition points, to solutions. So when someone landed looking for a visitor management solution, they knew right away where to hover to find some benefits of using the platform. And it worked. It was a really big winner. A huge first win for the company resulted in a 16.53% increase in email signups. Now I know, small change, very big lift. So this slide's a little overwhelming, but I wanted to show you the supporting metrics that are really where the exciting information is. So you can see that clicks to that sign-up CTA were way down, as well as visits to the trial page. They were also down. But exploration within the nav was way up. Within the two products that Envoy has, Envoy Visitors and Envoy Deliveries, as well as within these value proposition points. And so the biggest insight from this first experiment, the story that we were able to tell, is that people are looking for more information from Envoy. This is a new technology. They may not be quite sure how it works, and getting them to explore more in this nav, go to more pages, is actually really resulting in more signups. Also, trend line, just for any other skeptics in the room, this experiment ran for a month, and you can see it was very stable past the 13th. So in this results conversation, the core experimentation team were all in the room. Wider funnel, Michelle, Alex, our software engineer, and Amy, our designer. And this was really important to Michelle, for Alex and Amy to both be in the room to see these results, because it allowed them to be, again, a part of that results conversation and see the impact of the experiment, see the impact of the work and the conversations that they had had. And Alex, because he was on the call, was actually able to hard code the experience right then and there. So as soon as she got off the phone, Michelle went straight to Russ. And she told him verbally what the experiment had been. She explained it to him. And this happened right away. She also told him what it would mean in estimated additional annual revenue. And a few days later, she armed him with a formal results presentation to take to their executive team. Now, if we think about the story I told initially and that first champion who was trying to get everyone involved without properly inspiring, educating, and informing, what I want to point out here is that Michelle did not overstretch at this point. She is not trying to get the entire organization involved in the program. She's focusing her energy on the key stakeholders within her core team to make sure that they can get momentum rolling within it. So answering the questions that her key engineer has, answering the questions that her key designer has, making sure that her key executive stakeholder is bought in, is understanding, is participating, and as well getting some visibility from their executive board. She's not trying to go further than that, at least not at this stage. Eventually, Envoy will, of course, want to scale up the program into supporting teams. Might be their SEO, their paid, their product teams, their email teams. But the core team will need to continue to inspire, educate, and inform to enable these supporting teams to execute. But you're probably sitting there thinking, that seems like a lot for one team to be continuously inspiring, educating, and informing all these different individuals on all these different teams. And you're right, that's not very scalable. So you are going to want to implement some systems that will help you automate these actions. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So let's look at a slightly more mature organization that's building momentum for their program. Is everybody familiar with Square? Yes, cool. Okay, so Square is a pretty digitally mature organization. And when we partnered with Square, they were already bought into experimentation as a strategy, to the value of testing. And they wanted to scale. They had a core team assembled. It included a testing champion internally, an executive sponsor, and they had brought in an enabling partner. Now, this core team had a slightly different focus than Envoy's core team. Envoy's core team was focused on executing experiments. This core team is really focused on enabling those supporting teams. And they were focused on 8 different product teams. I do want to clarify, when I am talking about the product teams, I'm talking about the product marketers on those teams. So these are still marketing experiments. Now, they had gotten kind of lucky at Square and were able to lay some inspiration groundwork right off the bat. Basically, one of the highest visibility product teams at Square had just gone through a redesign, and it tanked. It was performing terribly, and the team was really struggling. And our experimentation champion saw this, and he saw an opportunity. So he brought in Wider Funnel, and together we looked at the redesign, and we were able to identify some barriers to conversion, some pain points, design a variation, launch an experiment, and it was a winner. And we were pretty confident that it would be a winner because the redesign was performing terribly. So this gave us a moment of real inspiration that was highly visible because this was such a high-impact product team. So at this point, the 7 other product teams were ready to go. They were chomping at the bit. They were excited. But like I said, at this stage, documentation becomes really crucial. When you're operating in a core team, you can get away with little to no documentation. You can get away with some more informality. But as you scale, as you try to enable more supporting teams, you really need to have some centralized processes, systems, and documents to enable proper knowledge transfer and ultimately the democratization of experimentation. So at Square, this took the shape of 2 primary activities. Workshops became the primary vehicle for education and continued inspiration, and documentation became the primary vehicle for informing. I want to talk a little bit about the workshops because, first off, these workshops were not one and done. It wasn't one workshop with each product team and then we're done. We've passed on all the knowledge. There are lots of pieces to doing this work. So the workshops covered how to do experiments, how to do results analysis, how to access the resources internally that these teams might be able to use to help them execute. But before all of that, the initial conversations were focused on changing mindsets, helping these product teams really think about experimentation in a different way. And I don't know if this is the same case for a lot of you, but once you get out of the core experimentation team, you run into mindsets that are a little bit more narrow. We talked about the problem with the term conversion rate optimization, and I think oftentimes in organizations there is an idea that experimentation is a very narrow tactic, that you can use it to make these small tweaks that are really focused on one metric and just generating some uplift. So with these workshops, we were really working on changing the mindset around testing and experimentation so that these teams could start to think about experimentation as a way to ask real questions and get real answers. So we designed a space where they were challenged to ask some questions. And these questions are not experiment questions. They are questions that are meant to get them to think about the questions that they might want to ask in an experiment. So, as we've heard many times this week, one of the first things we wanted to do was contextualize experimentation within the broader context of overall objectives. So getting the teams to tell us, what are your actual goals? What are your KPIs within the next quarter, within the next year? And also, what are the biggest questions you have right now internally, the biggest debates that you're having that an experiment might be able to answer? We also wanted to bring the focus back to the customer, to the user. I think sometimes teams will have ideas that they want to test because they think they're good ideas. I mean, we all have lots of ideas, but we wanted to remind these teams that they were really trying to service a user, a customer. So digging into their own user research, their own analytics, to think about how users were using the product pages, using the experiences, where they were coming from. And these questions here are focused on primary, supplementary analytics tools, but this is also a really good opportunity to bring in some of that meatier customer user research, qualitative research that we've been hearing a lot about this week. Another thing we really focused on is questions that would lay the groundwork for collaboration. So asking these teams right off the bat, are there insights or learnings from other teams' experiments that might be relevant to your team? And this is a really interesting discussion that oftentimes can reveal silos and gaps and point toward places that you may really want to focus in terms of how you're structuring your organization to enable experimentation. These workshops were an interactive learning opportunity where the core experimentation team could work with the product marketing teams to help them think about testing in a real way, asking real questions, getting real answers. It was about a mindset shift and two-way communication. And these workshops were also a place for continued inspiration, right? When you're asking these deeper questions, when you're thinking about experimentation as a real tool, it starts to reveal some very cool opportunities, some possibilities that these teams may not have even been considering before about how to better position their products and use experimentation to do that. So alongside these workshops, we were also working to create documentation. And I know this is not the sexiest thing, but it is super, super important at this stage. And the documentation would have two main functions. One was clarifying the roles and responsibilities within the team as you scale experimentation. And two is just talking about how you want to inform people, who you want to inform, when you want to inform them. So an actual communications plan. To clarify roles and responsibilities, we recommend using RACI or a similar model. If you haven't heard of RACI, it's really just a way to break down who owns a particular task. So R is responsible. This is the person who's actually doing the work to achieve the task. A is for accountable. This is the person who's accountable for the correct and thorough completion of the task. C is consulted. So these are people who are providing information as the task is getting completed, and there's two-way communication happening here. And then I is informed, so people that just need to stay informed of the task progress. So just to see what this looks like, this is an example RACI model that we use internally at Wider Funnel. Obviously, some of the tasks are only going to be relevant if you're a client-facing organization, but getting down to the bottom, you can see for something like results and insights analysis, the experimentation strategist is the primary owner of that task. They're responsible for the work, and they're accountable for its correctness, its completeness. And they're maybe consulting with the data analyst, the UX researcher. So you can see how you can start to lay this out. You also need an actual communications plan. So the plan should identify the information that needs to be communicated. It should list the methods of communication, both formal and informal, and how you're going to use them. It should determine the line of communication, so who is communicating with whom, and it should have intentional timing. So, example here, let's say the message that you want to communicate is that Experiment X has launched, and the owner of that message is the experimentation champion, and the channel that you've chosen is Slack. Everyone's in Slack, it's easy, this is just a quick notification. The audience for this message is all the teams that have been involved in creating that experiment. So potentially your engineering team, your design team, analytics team, and your primary stakeholder. And in an ideal world, this is automated, Slack is integrated with your testing tool, and it's just an automatic notification. And you want to do this for every step in your workflow. So from the experiment has concluded to here's a summary of this quarter's experiment results. And obviously, these are going to go in different channels, and they're going to have different audiences. And hopefully you caught Valerie's presentation yesterday for these two at the bottom. She gave some amazing tips on how to present results to executives. So if you didn't watch it, go back and watch it. OK, I'm going to bring up MailChimp because they've been an incredible organization to watch. I think we might have some MailChimp people in the room right now. But I first spoke to MailChimp a year ago when they were just getting started with their testing program. It was about 4 months old. And I bring them up because the program started in marketing. And since then, they've been able to scale it into 3 of their 9 product domains. And their technical content team is also now testing. They've really been able to prioritize it. This is Lauren. She's the Senior Director of Product Insights and Growth at MailChimp. And when I spoke to her last year, she told me that the communication strategy was a really huge component for her. So when the program kicked off, she really focused on documenting the workflow, doing a RACI model, and creating the internal comms plan. And she said that in her mind, this has been a major contributor to how the program has scaled and how it will be able to scale in the future. And I actually checked in with her last week, and she told me something really interesting. She told me that she was now calling the communications plan a marketing plan, and she was viewing all of her different audiences, as segments, and it was making her think about the channels of communication, tailoring the messages to the correct audience, using all those skills that we have as marketers, but pointing them inward to create that internal buy-in, to get more communication going internally. So, inspire, educate, inform. These are your tools. When you're talking to someone outside of your core experimentation group, team, or even inside your core experimentation team, keep this in mind. Is what I'm saying working to inspire this person? Is it an education component? Is it just necessary to keep them informed? And I do want to remind you to make sure that you have these actions in place and working at each stage as you scale. So in your core team, if your core team is not inspired, if they're not excited, if they don't have a proper understanding of how to do experimentation, and if you don't have an information loop that is closed, you may not be ready to scale up experimentation into supporting teams. Ultimately, our goal is to create a culture of experimentation that permeates an entire organization to get to a booking.com type of scenario. We all heard from Lucas. With Inspire, Educate, Inform, I really believe that everyone in this room can push their programs to that place. I put together a little resources package for everyone in the room. It's just got a couple of helpful resources that build on these themes. We're also developing this content continuously, so if you want to subscribe to the Wider Funnel blog, I'll be writing about it. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha. So we actually don't have time for questions,
Oh, no.
so I recommend you hit her up on the app.
Sorry,
but let's say
guys.
thank you again, Natasha. Thank you.